I was a very fearful person. I remember even as young as 4 years old, being afraid of going out into the world and living and being subject to the dangers there. And that just carried through all the way to high school, and then taking that leap of faith to go the way to college. And that was when the major stress of my life came, and I felt pressure academically, athletically, and socially. And I just felt like I had no strength in those areas. So I turned to food a lot for that, stress management. And I called my mom every day and I cried every day. It was my first semester of college. Right after Thanksgiving, my mom drove me back to school. I was in Boston, about 3.5 hours from home. And I was like, Mom, I have this mole right here that looks weird. And she moves my hand away. She's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're just now telling me this. I want to bring you home right now and get it looked at. And I was like, no, first of all, I have classes and practices. I can't go right now. So I went to the student health and they checked it out. He's like, oh, it's probably fine. And then I went back home the following weekend for a biopsy. And then I was waiting for the results and went back home for winter break. And that's when my family told me that it had come back positive and it was probably melanoma. I was a gymnast and did other sports. And then halfway through high school, I started diving and I got last place pretty frequently in the beginning. I had an amazing coach. He was so good. And I could cry talking about him now because of his role even in my cancer journey. I'm just so grateful for the story that God has given me and what he's done in my life. In a way, it was a relief because of all the stress. It was like, okay, I don't have to deal with that anymore. I just have to deal with this, even though it was cancer. Because I was young and athletic, my oncologist thought I was going to be fine long term. First of all, they injected a tracer. The procedure is called lymphoscintigraphy, where they trace it to the nearest lymph node, the sentinel lymph node, which was here. And then they biopsied this. And the same day, they also did a wide excision. And then I found out the sentinel node was positive for melanoma. A month and a half later, I had parotidectomy, a radical neck dissection. So they took 45 lymph nodes from my neck. And thankfully, all of that was negative. But then they recommended that I do interferon treatment, which was 1 month, 5 days a week. And then they gave me the option to do it once a month for 11 more months. But I wanted to go back to school and I didn't want to worry about if I was going to be tired or if it would interfere with my academics or athletics. That chapter of treatments took up the spring semester of college, and I did move back home for that. And then my lymphologist recommended scans every 6 months. So that was the plan, and that's what I did for about another 2 years. At the beginning of my senior year of college, I had a scan. I'd been in a relationship and we broke up. I remember telling my parents that it felt worse than having cancer. That happened end of February. April, I had the scan, which showed an area of concern near my jaw. And then in August, I had another scan, and that's when it was still concerning. So then I had a biopsy and it came back positive for melanoma, which is typical for melanoma. It can come back after 2 years of stage 3. I'm so thankful I had such a great competition my junior year, and nobody could take that away from me at this point with the rediagnosis. But I was looking forward to senior year and doing better. I had surgery. I had such a good surgeon, but unfortunately he missed the tumor by 1 millimeter. So I had another surgery about a month later. And in the meantime, another tumor had grown and was pressing against my earlobe. So they did another wide excision and they removed the earlobe. And also I felt something in my clavicle area the night before surgery, so they removed that. And it turned out that there was something in my adenoids on a PET scan I had a couple months earlier. They biopsied that, and thankfully that was nothing, just the 2 tumors. I had a lot of facial paralysis. I had facial paralysis in the first surgery in 2008, but this was a lot more difficult. They had to tape my eyelid shut for a couple nights because I could not even keep my eyelid shut. I couldn't drink properly. I had to tilt my head to one side because of my mouth and the lips not being able to move. And then, of course, the ear thing was very traumatic. I went to the bathroom and was washing my hands and looked up in the mirror and I saw that half my ear was gone, and that was very difficult. They said the nerve function should come back in about a month, but it took about a year for most of it to come back. I don't have 100%, but it's probably 98%. So I was 20 years old at that time, and they told me that because it had come back, the chance it would come back in the next 3 to 5 years was greater than 50%. And I looked back at my records and it said 80%. So I was thinking, what do I have to live for? If I'm only gonna live to be 23 or 25, I just thought, well, I'll just party with my friends and that'll be it. I ended up doing a month of radiation treatments after that, after 6 weeks of recovery. And then I made it to a training trip with my teammates, and I felt a lump under my chin at that time, and turned out I was the only person who had the lump. I wasn't sure if it was part of normal physiology because it was so small, but I ended up getting that biopsied right after coming back home. During that appointment, she was able to look at it under the microscope in the building, and so she said it was melanoma. That was hard as well. It brought me to that place of feeling discouraged. But the third time that I got the diagnosis. So then I had a scan that night and went back to school for the first day of the spring semester that next morning. And I had a follow-up appointment scheduled to go over the scan results. And my mom and my sister showed up in my dorm lobby, and I was a little naive, but they said there was going to be a snowstorm and they didn't want me to take the bus to get back to New York. So I was like, well, that's a dumb reason because it's not even going to be that bad, but okay. I'm not going to deny a comfortable ride home. I brought them up to my room, and that was when my mom said I should sit down. And then she told me the news that the scan showed or confirmed the lesion under my chin, as well as up to 6 others in my neck, my lung, and my spine. And the worst part was that I didn't qualify for the most promising drug that my oncologist wanted me to try, which was ipilimumab. I was out of options conventionally for the most part. That was the most hopeless time in my cancer journey and life, and I just didn't know what to do. I thought about all the doctors in the whole wide world, like all the different countries, like China, what do they have? But they must not have had much because I had doctors at Memorial Hospital, NYU, and Dana-Farber, some of the top cancer hospitals, and they didn't have anything for me. But my mom, in kind of the next breath, said that her friend who had babysat me, she'd been friends with her for a long time, had been doing research on alternative medicine for supposedly incurable diseases. She found that there were people who had healed from cancer, like miraculously, stage 4 cancer, terminal cancer. And her friend had started doing research and brought one of the supplements that had some miracle stories attached to it. I don't remember when we started talking about nutrition, but I started studying nutrition in college, and I believed in the power of nutrition to heal less severe illnesses like diabetes. And so when I came across the Gerson therapy, it was like, well, I guess maybe it could help heal cancer as well. So that was encouraging and hopeful for me. And there was a retrospective study published in 1995 by Garhild and Brandt, the methodologist that I ended up working with a little bit later as I decided to go to Mexico for treatment. That paper showed a 39% 5-year survival rate in the stage and extent of the melanoma that I had. My mom did most of the research and came across Coley's toxins, which had a 60% 5-year survival rate in inoperable melanoma. I was cautiously hopeful that those things could work. There was a motivational speaker named John Gordon who came to speak to the athletes the day after I found out that I had stage 4 cancer. This guy was talking about working hard, staying positive, and using the challenges that come into your life to inspire others. I learned a lot over the years about being an educated and empowered patient who does their own research and researches things, not just going with what the doctor says, because they're limited in their tools and the training. I went to a place called Chipsa Hospital, and they have inpatient capabilities there for people who are severely debilitated or run down. There's another clinic called St. Andrew's Clinic, which I recommend now for people who are able to go if they want to do Coley's toxins and the Gerson therapy. And again, that's where Garhild and Brandt is working, the methodologist who helped me. And he's the one who authored that paper in 1995 on the Gerson therapy and melanoma. Dr. Kelly Turner writes about supplements and changing your diet and all the mind, body, spirit things as well. I had started incorporating those things, and I did see an integrative oncologist when I started radiation to help with the side effects and hopefully prevent a recurrence. I had started with some supplements and a little bit of diet changes leading up to that. And I did do 1 round of chemo pills, 5 pills over 5 days to help buy some time because it was taking us weeks to figure out what to do. I had started the Gerson therapy, modified Gerson therapy. There's like a more rigid Gerson therapy, which I don't particularly agree with, but I did a modified version with 3 coffee enemas, 13 juices per day, some supplements, and I did have chicken or fish once or twice a week when I was there in the hospital, which I didn't continue at home. I wasn't totally sold on the idea of having that much. My mom was home for about a week, and then she went back to work. My dad was working the whole time. And then we're kind of like, how can we make this work? Because I'm not physically able to make all of those juices and the soup that the Gerson therapy contains and the coffee for the coffee enemas. People from our community became my juicing helpers. 1 to 3 people every morning who would help with the rinsing and the drying and cutting and the juicing and then cleaning everything up. It was amazing. It was a gift, a blessing. My mom also gave me the Coley's toxins injections in the morning before she left for work. That, I think, was one of the reasons, too, that I was tired. I generally had pretty good energy after going through the initial Coley's reaction. By the time I left Mexico, I could feel the lesion under my chin. And then I went home and I continued as much as I could at home. I didn't do high-dose vitamin C at home, which was one thing I did in Mexico. And it wasn't that high, with like 5 or 6 grams. And then Laetrile, which is also known as amygdalin or B17. And I did have some multivitamin infusions in Mexico. So those 3 I did not do at home. But everything else I did. After 3 weeks of that, I went for a follow-up scan. And that's when I just went into it thinking this could be kind of good or kind of bad. My doctor said that according to the scan, there is no sign of active disease. After 10 weeks after my scan that showed it was stage 4. There's a little bit of a Coley's supply issue. So I think I might have taken like a week and a half off of it completely. And then I started doing it twice a week after that, or a few months until September. End of March was when I had the scan that said no evidence of disease. And then in early September is when I went back to school and I started doing it once a week. I dropped juices down to maybe 8 juices per day. I was doing down to 2 coffee enemas per day. After 5 years of remission, that was the end of the honeymoon phase. For 5 years, I was like, I can't believe how blessed I am. And then life became more difficult or more dreary day-to-day things. And then I ended up in not the best place emotionally and found myself struggling even with the desired. I ended up getting Lyme disease because I was so emotionally down. I felt it in my body. I've just been really surprised and grateful at how far God's love and grace reaches because He loves us and wants to use us at our very lowest.